Good afternoon. You're listening to Gambling with an Edge. Now here are your hosts, Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. I'm Bob Dancer.
And I'm Richard Munchkin.
Our guest today goes by the name of Fats, and he's arguably one of the top sports bettors of all time. He says he's not adverse to being called a legend. Fats, welcome to Gambling with an Edge.
Thank you, Bob. It's nice to finally actually meet you, because I followed your video poker work over the years, and you're a legend yourself.
Thank you. So I don't forget, I want to give your Twitter handle. It's @real_Fats. And what kind of stuff do you have on Twitter?
Well, on Twitter, since I did the interview with Spanky on Be Better Bettors, that was when I first joined Twitter. So it's only been about a year and 2 months. And I started picking up followers there. I never really kind of got a feel for, a niche for it or what the best use of it was out of the gate. But what addicted me to Twitter was shortly after I joined, Spanky had tweeted out that it had been a year since he had COVID, which was like March, because he had it early on. And he was talking about how, he felt and what it was like, and he was kind of reminiscent about it. And I responded to the tweet, and I said, Spanky, the only reason why you got COVID-19 so early was because you thought it was going to go to COVID-21 and you wanted to buy it back. And I just thought I was being funny. And for the next 24 hours, my phone was blowing up. I picked up 100 followers off of just that one comment. And then it got a ton of views and stuff. And then that was it. I was addicted to Twitter. And since then, I've made it kind of my mission on a few things. I like to, on Twitter, one of the things I like to do is I like to help new people. My DM is always open on Twitter, and anybody, big or small, has a question or wants to ask me something, if they DM me, I field their questions. I give them the best answer I can, guide them, or whatever advice I can give them. So I do that. And then I keep anybody that I know on Twitter that's, giving out false information with regard to sports. I call them out all the time. In particular, this guy, George Panagakis, if any of you guys are familiar with him, he just says the most ridiculous things. He says CLV means nothing, and he makes just the most ludicrous statements, and I just call him out on everything. And then there was the Philly Godfather, who's a tout, who's a pretty disreputable guy, and I went after him for about 3 months on there too, and exposed a lot of his scams. So those are the types of things I do on Twitter. Plus, if I tweeted this out the other day just because I was watching a show with my wife, and it was a question on a game show about what do you do in the woods if you come across a bear? And my wife's answer was, you make a lot of noise and flail your arms. And my answer was, you stand still and do nothing. And my wife said, no, you're wrong. And I said to my wife, I'll tell you what, if I ever run into a bear in the woods, I said, I hope I'm with you, because I'm going to be safe either way.
Huh.
Because if it's flail your arms, the bear's going to run away. And if it's not, I'll be standing still while the bear's mauling her. So, something like that comes up, I tweet that out just for humor or something like that. Every now and then my dog will do something, so I'll tweet something like that out there too, with a picture.
Well, let's go back to the beginning. How and when did you first get involved in sports betting?
The actual involvement in sports betting came from a neighbor of mine, I was always interested in sports, and a neighbor of mine, I used to visit him all the time. He was older, but I would hang out with him, he had a bookie, and I heard him betting one time, and I kind of just listened to him and talked to him, and just through my association with him, I did that. And then I discovered a friend of mine in school whose father was a bookie. He was writing bets for his friends, and so I was able to bet, $5 a game. Of course, back then, if you bet less than $50, you had to put up 6 to 5, which didn't seem that terrible at the time, but obviously.
Now, how old were you at this point?
I would say about 10th grade or somewhere around there.
About 15, maybe.
Yeah.
When was the first time you backed off from betting?
Backed off from betting?
Yeah.
I would have to say that really wasn't until I moved to Vegas, and then I was doing it and then I kind of learned all the ropes and stuff like that. I never really was chased in my early days because I knew what I was doing, but I wasn't nearly betting big enough or anything like that I ever could have made a difference until after I moved to Vegas and started working for the businessman, and
I think Bob was referring to, there was an incident where you were making the picks for somebody else on parlay cards or something, and when you're a teenager.
Well, the teachers in my high school had a football pool, and the pool happened to be sitting, and it was just pick the winners, like 20 games every week, and all the NFL and just a few random college games, and it was sitting on the teacher's desk, my homeroom teacher, and who was also my French teacher. And I was walking out the door, and I said, "Oh, by the way, don't make sure you take Pittsburgh this week." And she said she took the pool. So, well, who else should I take? So I just went and I picked the whole thing for her, and she won the pool that week. And then she gave me like $10, and then she had me picking for her every week. And the guy who ran the pool was a physics teacher, and I made some comment to him one day, like 3 or 4 weeks later. And then the next thing I knew, the teacher says, "I can't give you the picks anymore. I've been banned from picking the games because he went and told teacher she can't let me pick her games for her." So I guess that was the first time I was banned.
Good. All right. So you were 15 and kicked out of betting in your school. You mentioned businessman. When was this? Who was he? And what kind of things did you do?
Okay, the businessman, as I referred to him in my Spanky interview, there was a bookie that I used to bet with, and the businessman used to bet with him. Every week I would go to see this guy to settle, and he'd be crying how this guy is beating him week after week after week. And I said, you'll get it eventually. You'll get the money. And so I had decided I was going to move to Vegas to try to middle games that college basketball season. Right before I went, this guy who I was betting with had a partner, and he said, "We know a guy out there who bets out there, and we could use you to do something." And I didn't really know what it was. And what it was the guy's partner. He was also partners with the businessman, because what the businessman would do is he would beat these bookmakers up to the point where he owned them, and then he would kind of make a deal with them to get his money back. And so he kind of had a piece of them. And so anyway, they referred me. So I went out to Vegas in January of 1989 like I was planning to. But instead of doing what I was going to do, I got involved with working for the businessman as a runner. And that's how I got started out in Vegas. If that was the original question, I don't even remember right start.
So So being a runner, did you make any of the picks yourself? Did you use any of his picks? Did you, or just do what he said? And
I always did exactly what I was told to bet. Didn't bet very much for myself. One of the first things I did when summer started was I saw baseball, and that was my first introduction to the run line. I was looking at the run line. I was like, oh, this team's like a $1.40 favorite, but you can get plus $1.50 if they win by 2. Well, they can win by 2. Why can't they win by 2? So I used to think, oh my God, what? That's like free money laying a run and a half. And I swear, I never could win. They would either lose or win by 1 every one I bet. So I learned right away that laying a run and a half wasn't a good idea. But what I eventually, years later, was I flipped that script pretty good, and I made a mint taking a run and a half down the road after I had been on my own. And
now we should point out you have a degree in math, right?
That is correct. Both my parents were math teachers, and we grew up. My dad, in particular, who just passed away a year ago, he used to, at dinner every night, he'd ask us math questions, me and my brother, and, we'd try and, get the answers. And then he used to always have, like in geometry, for example, he used to ask a lot of true or false questions. And it'd be true or false, an angle of this is blah, blah, blah. And the bottom line was, it was always false. But it sounded true. But you couldn't just say false because you had to come up with the counterexample as to why it was false. So my father we'd be sitting there at dinner and my father would go, true or false? And me and my brother, we couldn't yell false out fast enough. And then he'd read it, then he'd say, no, you can't do that. And he'd tell us the question and we'd be like, well, sounds true. And I'd always be like, it's still false. But I couldn't always come up with the counterexample, but my brother was pretty good at that. So
this obviously helped you enormously being a professional bettor.
It did. Now I'll tell you an interesting story about my dad when I first came out to Vegas. He was out there one year, and it was like around Christmas time or something. And he was looking at the board, and they had the baseball futures up there. And there were like 10 teams that were all 100 to 1 to win the World Series. And he said, 100 to 1, that's crazy. He used to do this thing with his thumb because he used to say baseball, it's a flip of a coin. So he said, that's a flip of a coin, 100 to 1. So he bet all 10 teams for $5 each. So $5 to win 500. And when the World Series came around, Atlanta was playing Minnesota in the World Series, and they were both 100 to 1s that he had bet. So he had the only thing he had to do was wait till Game 7 ended before he could cash his ticket, because it didn't matter who won, he was winning either way. So my dad, baseball, flip of a coin. And as far as baseball is concerned, I kind of agree with that because I used to bet baseball all the time, and I don't really bet much baseball anymore because I consider it the crack cocaine of sports betting.
Just because there's so much of it, you could be playing it nonstop during the summer?
Yeah, and the reason is we know how hard it is to bet NFL, and we know the limits we get on NFL. And baseball, you get similar limits, not necessarily as high as NFL, but you get pretty big limits in baseball. But baseball is every day, so that's like having NFL 7 days of the week. It's hard enough to beat it one day of the week. You can't beat it 7 days of the week. Eventually, baseball will implode on you, and you kind of get addicted to it, and then it's like the crack cocaine of sports betting.
So you can't find an edge big enough to make it worthwhile.
Yeah, well, now I'm just talking about basically straight sides and totals for the most part. Now, with all the different props and all that other stuff, I'm sure there's edges in it. I've just never delved deep into that yet.
So do you take summers off, or what do you do?
For the most part, I'll go from the beginning of preseason football and just kind of get myself set up and take it slow, get into it, and then by the time basketball rolls around, I'll get into doing the college, and then when January, it's a race to the Final Four, and by the time we get to March, it's like, let's end this already and get out of here and enjoy the summer. Although I have to tell you, 32 years of sports betting, since I moved to Vegas in 1989, this particular season, by far, bar none, was the best college basketball season I've ever seen. I've had the stuff I was getting was just winning every single week, and there was a lot of other people I know that were winning as well. And
why do you think that is? Was it just variance, or the lines were that far off?
Well, I'm going to credit my source of where I was getting my information from, but if I told you, if I gave you that information, then I'd have to kill you. So.
Yeah. Can you tell Richard? No, sorry.
But it was really just crazy. That's really all I can say about that.
So are you? I do not know much of anything about sports, but so are you an originator at all, or are you just someone? Because there are two parts of any kind of gambling, right? There's finding an edge, and then there's actually getting the money down to make money with the edge. And it sounds to me like you're the guy who gets the money down, not the guy who originates. Is that fair? Or do you both?
To an extent. My specialty is by far figuring out the best way to get down, but also not necessarily to get down, but how to actually bet. And when I say how to actually bet, a lot of times, somebody might have a game that they like, but you're better off if you buy points, or maybe look for the money line on that, or various things like that. And as an originator, I'm an originator when it comes to finding an edge. And I'll give you over this past football season, there were about three or four things I found where I found a distinct edge, and I was betting them and exploiting them until I got cut off. So there's definitely.
Now, when you say you found three or four things, is that from like mining a database, or?
No, that's just from looking at the odds that are being offered and saying that's just not right. And then maybe doing a little bit of minor statistical analysis on my own, but nothing with a database or anything like that. Like I'll take a theory. Let's say I'll have a theory on, and one of the things was in NBA, and it involved the bets where it's you can bet the winner of the first half wins the game, the winner of the first half loses the game, the winner of the first half ties the game, and then the loser of the first, there's like 9 combinations. So I was looking at those odds, and I kind of thought they were interesting. So what I did was I went back to the beginning of the season, which was maybe 2 months, and I charted for the different point spreads. Like if it was a game was picked to 4, maybe it was 4 to 8, and then 8 to 10, or 12, and then higher than 12. And I just said, okay, let's see. And I made a little chart, and I checked every game, and if it was favorite and the dog, favorite and the tie, favorite and the under, and the favorite, etc. And I charted them out and then did those percentages and then compared them to the spreads that was being offered. And I found an edge on a certain combination. So I was just playing those combinations as parlays, or I think I was doing round robin parlays on just all the ones that had an edge, and I was doing good, and then all of a sudden one day they adjusted them all, and that was
well, nothing lasts forever.
No, nothing lasts forever. An interesting one that came up this year was the round robin parlay of death. If you recall from the podcast, where I had there were 5 games that were 10-1 dogs on a college basketball Sunday, and I played each one straight up for 1,000, and then played $500 round robin parlay, all the 2-team combinations at 10-1. I did that to Spiro, and my theory was that, well, if I only win one of the 5 games, I'm going to win 10,000, lose 9,000, everything else, so I'm still a winner. If I win 2, I win 20,000 plus I hit the parlay. $500 parlay at 10-1 and 10-1 pays 60,000. So if I hit 2, that's going to be 80 less the change on the other stuff. And if you hit a third one, jackpot. So anyway, ever since I did that, I've always looked and never found those odds again. The odds that were at the level that they were that day to do that until opening day of college basketball this past season. And on opening day, there were 7 games that were in that 10-1 range, where it was 10-1 was a little higher than it should have been for those games. So, of course, the sports books, I'm not playing as big as I used to, and the sports books aren't taking that much anyway on those kind of things. So what I did was there were 7 games. I played the $50 round robin parlay, which was $2,050, 21 combinations. And then I bet $140 straight up on each one, which would have given me about 1,800 or whatever it was, or 180, whatever it was. I bet each one straight up. And the bottom line was, if I won 1, I wasn't getting killed. If I won 2, great. 3, phenomenal. Well, I ended up winning 3 of the games, and it came out to about $20,000 net for the little bit that I invested. And the interesting story about that, though, is a guy had contacted me on Twitter about, must have been the middle of football season, asking me about the round robin parlay of death, and he wanted to know if it was possible to do it with some of the college football games. I said, I'll take a look, but I don't think so. And I looked at it and I said, nah, those odds, you're not going to do anything with that. That's no good. So anyway, that day, I looked that guy up back in my Twitter, and I recontacted him, and I said, hey, I got a present for you. And I asked him first how much you bet, and, because I don't want to warn anything, and he was a small bettor. I said, look, here's what I want you to do. I said, do you have access to bet this place? He says, yes. I said, okay. Here's 7 games. Bet yourself a $5 round robin parlay on these 7 games, and then bet each game straight up for $20. I said, that's it. Just do that exact. And I said, you'll have a round robin parlay of death work. Well, anyway, we won the first game. We won the second game. And then we were free rolling 5 games, and we ended up winning a third one. So we hit 3 of them, and that was how that came out. And that guy won like $2,000, and he texted me after the third one, and he said, "Can I send you a tip?" And I told him, I said, "No, I didn't give it to you for a tip. I just gave it to you because you expressed interest in it before and it came up, so I thought it'd be fair to give it to you." I said, "But if a 4th game wins, then you can send me something." But we didn't win a 4th game. But
I
that's how you
think
get-
your
that's how you get a
DMs are
chance
about
to
to
win.
blow up.
Yes, I
I get a
think you're
fan
going to get
for
a
that.
lot of Twitter followers of, "Oh yeah, send me something too."
Yeah.
Well, now I get a lot of people that do that try to call me up or tweet me, and they're asking for advice and they want to be a professional gambler, and they ask me, who should I bet on? And my standard answer is, I can't tell you that, because if I tell you, well, they said, "Well, who did you bet on?" And I said, I can't give you that information, because if I tell you who I bet on, you can't bet it at the same number I bet it at, because I've already bet it. And if I've already, at the number it's at now, I wouldn't let my grandmother bet it. So I can't give it to you. So I try to explain it to them that way. And a lot of times the other advice I give them is I tell them not to quit their day jobs, but I do, based on how they play and what they do, I try and give them the best tips I can as far as what they can do to modify their, their system, or how they're betting, or try to pick up an edge with what they're doing.
So most of the guys that I talk to that are getting into this describe basically, a number is 7 and it moves to 6.5, and they go grab the 7 before it moves, which I had never heard this term until Bet Bash. People are calling top down. Is that the same as what people used to call chasing steam, or is that different? And can you actually make a living at that?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not familiar with the term as it is top down, but as you just described it, that would be chasing steam. Although in my case, I would never take the 7. I'd find a way to get 7.5 somewhere, even if I could buy it 7.5 minus 20 or something like that. As far as NFL though, I mentioned this. I didn't mention this, and I mentioned this on a different podcast I did. Somebody said, "Can you give somebody any recommendation for betting the NFL?" And I said, if you do nothing else betting the NFL, if you never lay 3.5, lay 7.5, take 6.5, or take 2.5, you'll have more money at the end of your life than if you do. It's just, I never did. And there was one, I cited, there's one football season where I would not lay 3.5 on a football game. I don't care. I would lay 4. I would wait till it goes to 4 and lay 4, but I would not lay 3.5. And I think over that entire football season, I think I broke down 3 times, laid 3.5, and 2 of the games fell through.
All right, we're going to take a brief commercial break. We are going to come back and ask Fats that when he started hiring runners, what were the 3 questions that he asked them to see if they were a good potential runner. The South Point has more than 10,000 games returning at least 99%. This is more such games than anyone else has. Beginning June 6th at 3 a.m., the $600,000 spin to win promotion, Monday through Thursday, play 2,500 points at video poker or 750 at slots, and spin the virtual wheel. You may win between 2,500 and 100,000 slot points worth $750, $300 respectively, or free play between $500 and $100. You may spin up to 4 times per promotion day. They have never run this exact promotion before, although they have run similar ones. In the past, only $200,000 video poker points were required. In the past, it was listed as a $500,000 promotion, and then the average spin was worth between $12 and $15. Both the required play and the amount promised have gone up. And Michael Gaughan makes it a point of pride that if he tells you he's going to give away such and such an amount, he always gives away at least that amount. The promotion hasn't started yet, so I can't give you any data as to how much the average spin will be worth this year. My best guess is between $15 and $20, up to 4 times a day, but it's only an educated guess based on experience at that casino.
If you're serious about card counting, Blackjack Apprenticeship membership is a great way to learn, train, network, and get the resources you need to succeed. We've had quite a few guests on Gambling with an Edge who exclusively trained and got their start through Blackjack Apprenticeship. Check out the website at blackjackapprenticeship.com. They have member forums, training software, and guides to help you learn. So that's blackjackapprenticeship.com, and there will be a link in the show notes.
If you sign up for the gold membership, $8.95 a month or $79.95 a year, this allows you to get correction on most of the games. The game of the week is split card poker. This is 10 coins per hand game where periodically on the deal or the draw, not both, you receive a split card. A split card may be any card. Once the split card is chosen, the additional card may be with equal probability the same card, the card lower, or the card higher. For example, if the ace of clubs is a split card, it is equally likely to become the ace king of clubs, the ace deuce of clubs, or 2 aces of clubs. The only pay schedule addition is 5 of a kind on non-wild card games and 5 deuces on deuces wild variation. All right, we are back talking to Fats. And one thing we are not going to talk about today that our listeners are going to want to know about is when he worked for Billy Walters. Billy Walters has a magical name in this business. However, this is discussed extensively on the Spanky interview, Be Better Bettors. And so we highly recommend that. The link to that, the Be Better Better interview, is in the show notes. But be prepared to listen for a while because it's a long interview. It's entertaining and informative. All right. You started working on your own, hiring runners. How did you pick who was going to be your runner?
Well, the hiring of the runner process was something that when I was working for the businessman, and so anybody that he would send me, I wasn't worried about them. And anybody else, I really didn't want anybody else, because as long as I know my runners came from the guy I'm working for, then I don't have to worry about vetting them and being responsible for them. But the problem is that when you have a crew out there, all the runners talk and everybody wants to, I want to work for this guy, or I'm not happy working for this guy, I'd rather work for that guy. And so, or a guy loses his job for some reason, and you never really know the real reason why the guy's not working. But he's, I'd be a great runner for you. So week in and week out, I got guys wanting, hey, can I work for you? So finally I just said, you know what? I'm going to make a job interview. I'm going to give everybody a job application. So I created a job application, and it was 10 pages long. And I have it somewhere. I don't have it handy because it's packed in a box from when I moved. So I don't have it. But one of these days I'm going to dig it out and maybe post it on Twitter. But anyway, I made it 10 pages, and a lot of the questions are the standard questions you would see on a general job application: name, address, social security number, phone number, references. And then I started asking all kinds of other questions as well. And mixed in, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite sports team? all kinds of stuff like that. And the whole point of it was to hide. Well, the whole point of it was I didn't want to hire anybody. So
yeah, usually 10 pages is enough to make a lot of people just not bother anymore.
So if they had the fortitude to go through the 10 pages, I had to be able to find something in there that I knew I wasn't going to want to hire them for. So there were 3 questions in there that were just guaranteed to cause them to fail the job interview. The first question was, I asked them, what's the best strip club in Las Vegas? And now if they didn't know, that was a good sign. If they knew, that was the first strike against them, because if they know what the best strip club is, that means they go to them all the time. And if they go to them all the time, then I got to worry about them meeting the wrong girl or spending their money in the wrong way and always being broke, and eventually somehow my money's going to end up there. So that was the first one. So anybody that knew the best strip club in town or could recommend it, that was a strike against them. And the nice part about that was that question, you'd get some of the longest answers. Like they thought they were doing a great job answering that question. I mean, I think I had one guy, he like listed them all and gave them all ratings and stuff like that. So that guy had no shot. So the second question I asked him was, in all your gambling, what's the best day you ever had gambling? Now, most people always want to brag about what that I'm going to work for a guy in the gambling. I want him to think I'm a good guy. So they brag about, they're always happy to tell you what their best day was. The problem is, as I'm sure you all know, is whatever your best day is, you can take that number and multiply it by 5, and that's what you're capable of your worst day being. So whatever their best day was, I would take that number and I'd multiply it by 5, and I'd say, all right, this is, if I hire this guy, this is what my exposure is going to be. So that number was usually too high, so there, boom, can't hire the guy. And then the third one was, I would ask them, I would say, let's say I tell you to bet a game, but you happen to know from your own personal handicapping, you like the other side, and you know it's a bad bet. Before betting it, would you tell me so that I knew too? Or would you just bet it because I told you to bet it? And they don't know. No, I would let you know. If I got something, if you tried to make a bad bet, I would tell you right away. Well, you're just a runner. You're not the guy who's crunched all the numbers and ran the computer programs and been a winning gambler for your life, because you're a runner. So I'm not anybody that was willing to do that. They're no good either, because you just want your runners. You want your runners to know nothing about sports. And the best runners are the runners I've hired over the years that never knew anything about sports. You taught them actually how to make a bet, and then you tell them, and they go to the window and they bet. They don't think twice about it. So those were the 3 questions, and nobody ever came close to getting past all 3 questions.
But now when you have all these people running around with large amounts of cash, you must have had some of them just steal the money.
Well, I had very good success over my career on that. And one of the reasons was because I cashed my runners out every single day. So they would meet me, they would get their money, they'd go bet what they had to bet, and then they'd have to turn it in at the end of the day. And because they had to turn it in at the end of the day, they don't have room to sit there and get themselves stuck and then try and figure out how to make it up. And anytime you deviate from that, that's when you get yourself in trouble. One example is a guy we had. His name was Sweet Old Bob. And
I didn't do it.
It wasn't you. But Bob was the nicest guy. I knew him through somebody that I had worked with who was a handicapper, and so I gave him a job. I let him be a runner, and then one day we were real low on money in Vegas. We had like nothing. We were down to like the final scraps, and we were using a skeleton crew. And Bob was the only guy I had working, and he had a small bankroll, and so I tell him to bet everything I told him to bet, and oh yeah, so I give him a bunch of games, and it's the last, but he was short 1,000. He advanced himself 1,000, or so he was short 1,000. So he bet everything but the last game, and he just wrote the book the last game himself because he didn't have the money to bet it, and he didn't want to tell me he didn't have the money to bet it. So we lost every game but that. So now I should have a bankroll of 2,000, and I have a bankroll of nothing. So the next day, I give him 4 games to bet for $500 each, or 2 games to bet for 1,000 each. Of course, he says you got him, doesn't bet him. They both win. Now my bankroll is 4,000, but it's really 0. So the next day, I give him 4 baseball totals, 1,000 apiece. We'll go 4-0. So now we're at 8,000.
But you're not following your rule of collecting every day.
Because it was such a small amount that he had, it wasn't worth. And I had gone out of town once and actually left him in charge of the bankroll, not had a problem. And we're talking about a much more significant bankroll once. So, I'm not even thinking about it because it's such a small amount of money. So the next day, the Phillies are playing the Cubs. And the Cubs are $1.60 favorite. And I tell him, bet the whole 8,000 on the Cubs, 8,000 to win 5,000. I said, and if the game wins, you got to meet so-and-so, give him half the money, and now I can have 2 guys working. So the Phillies are winning like 7 or 8 to nothing. So he's off the hook. The Cubs lose, he's off the hook. But the wind was blowing out that day, my friends. And as you would know, the Cubs came back, won the game, and I told him to meet the guy, and then I'm getting a phone call. Hey, he's not showing up. And I look out my window, and there he is. I see a guy walking up to my window carrying his beeper and his radio, and then he comes in and he tells me the story. And what we ended up doing with Bob was the businessman, in situations like that, he sent the guy back to Philadelphia and put him to work in his supermarket. And he worked it off. And he was really a good guy, Bob. He just, screwed up. He worked it off and eventually built himself back in the business, and then started working on the sports end from that side of the thing. So that was Bob. We did have we had another situation one time where we had a guy. He was the son of a state representative in Pennsylvania, and so we figured this guy was pretty good, and we had him working, and he took a shot at blackjack or something one day, so he came up short, and this was after I was done with the businessman, so we had no, it wasn't. But anyway, we came up with a plan, and the plan was, because we used to go to Wrigley Field, and we used to have a guy who would go to Wrigley Field every day and would call in the weather. And we were having trouble with the guy. He was getting lazy. He didn't always want to do it. So we told this kid, we said, go to Chicago, get yourself a job, be at the Cubs game anytime the Cubs are home. Be there in the stands, in the bleachers, 3 hours before the game starts, and you call in the weather report. And if you do that for the whole season, for the rest of the season, then you'll be cleared of the money you owe. And then we were going to throw him something too if he actually did it. Well, one day he tells us the wind is blowing in, and he wasn't at the stadium, so he just guessed. And he said the wind was blowing in. Tom Browning was pitching for the Reds, and he gave up 11 runs in the first inning. And the wind was howling out, and that was the end of that guy. So we just chalked it up, and that was the end of that. But we never had any expenses for him. He went and did get a job in a room, place to stay, and so it never cost us anything else except that Browns game, that Reds game. But so those are two examples. I'll have to say there was one time though, there was a guy that I was very close with. I knew his whole family. He worked with another big crew, and his name was Barry. And this guy, he was the kind of guy he'd come to your house and he'd steal a roll of toilet paper from you, but he was always good with the money though. I mean, he always brought the money back. He was generally a good kid. He just liked comps and stuff like that. So I used to take him out to feed him all the time and work with him and stuff like that. Well, he was cheating on his wife with some cocktail waitress. And one day I send him out on a Monday morning, with all tickets to cash from the weekend. And he was supposed to cash out some tickets, meet one of the other runners, give them their money. And the other runner's he never showed up. And anyway, the guy ended up running off with the money. It was about $100,000. Wow. This was the only big hit I ever really took. And the biggest problem was he did it on September 9th. And it was right before September 11th when the towers came down. So you weren't even going to get law enforcement to chase this guy down because the town, everything was focused on that. So I eventually did. I tracked him down. I knew found out where he was. Wasn't going to get any money back from him. I did sue him and got a judgment against him, but never collected any of the money. And would you believe the guy had the nerve to send me a Facebook friend request a couple of years ago?
Wow. We have a ton more questions for you and not nearly enough time. So you're going to have to come back. There's just no arguing that. We have 5 minutes for another story that you hinted at before the show. And that when you were in Vegas, you played backgammon for some very unusual stakes. Can you tell that in 5 minutes?
All right. The story started shortly after I had gotten divorced. I went to, or actually it was right before I got divorced, but the divorce was pending. I went to Duke Diet and Fitness Center in North Carolina to lose weight. I was there for 3 months. At the end of my divorce went final while I was there. At the end of the 3 months, I met this girl who we hit it off. When I left Duke, I went with her. Then we drove across country. She came back to Vegas with me. We got along really well, and she was all about wanting to get married and everything like that. And I always said, look, my lifestyle is such that, it's an acquired taste. So if you want to come out here and you want to live with me for a year and we're still getting along great, I said, I'll get married. But other than that, I can't, I really don't want to do that. And she decided that, she said, no, I can't live with somebody unless I'm married. So we just kept having this long distance relationship. And then one year she came out and we were driving back across the country and we were supposed to go to, I was going to meet her parents and then we were going to go to her brother's reunion. And on the way home, she's explaining to me that, this is, she's introducing me to her family. That like means that we're telling them like we're like a thing. We're going to be getting married. And I'm like, right then and there on that drive, I said, I got to get out of this. Now, at the same time, along the way, you're wondering how this is going to get to backgammon. And we had played backgammon a lot at Duke and Diet Fitness Center as something to do. But anyways, we're driving across the country. My friend, the businessman, calls me, and he had a big mansion. He was throwing a big party, and they had these lamb chops that are to die for, and on a stick. And I said, well, I can't. I got this thing this week. And he says, forget that. Don't go to that. What do you want to go to that for? Come back up to Philly and do that. So I decided, you know what? I got to get out of this relationship anyway. So I decided I was going to do that. And so we get to her house and we're there. And I tell her, I said, look, you know what? I really don't think this is going to work out. I think I'm going to go back to Philly. And she's like, no, you got to stay. We got to. So she says, all right, let's play one game of backgammon for the relationship. I said, what do you mean for the relationship? She says, if she wins, we get married. If I win, I can go. I said, okay.
How could you agree to that? I mean, I'm sure you had a massive edge, but backgammon is,
Actually, I didn't. She used to beat me most of the time, but I felt confident that I could win the game because there was no cube involved. It was just straight win the game, and I was good at playing a back game. And so, anyway, we played. I won. And then she didn't want to let go. Then she made me eat dinner with her and her parents that night before I left. And then, so I had to eat dinner with her and her family, and then tell her family, by the way, we're breaking up and we're not seeing each other anymore.
Oh, man.
So
awkward.
But the lamb chops were to die for.
That's great. I just, real quick before we go, I have to ask you, because I know you played backgammon for a lot of years. A couple of weeks ago, Elihu Feustel was on, and he mentioned that a lot of the bookmakers in Costa Rica play backgammon, and I'm just wondering if you ever flew down there to get any of that action.
I was lucky enough to get to play, what's his name? The guy that runs Chris. I can't think of his name right now off the top of my head. What's his name? The head guy at Chris. Not
anyway, not really a sports guy.
Everybody else knows who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
All he does is play backgammon. And when I was down there one time, I got to play him. We played for about, I think, 100 a point or 50 a point. I think I beat him for like 500, but never could get near him again. And part of the reason is because the people that play him don't want anybody new getting involved because it's like a cash machine playing.
Sure, it was like Larry Flint when he had his poker games.
Yes.
Yeah. But you didn't want to do that with Stan Thompson, who had Pinnacle.
No, Stan, actually, it's funny. I was very close with Stan. Actually, the guy who robbed me of the 100 was Stan's nephew, by the way. Or it was either his nephew or godson, something along those effects, which was how I met the guy, through Stan. But over the years, I worked with Stan on various things, and towards the very end, God rest his soul, but after the case, because Stan was involved in our case when we had all gotten arrested, Stan reached out to me afterwards, and for the last couple years, I was betting NBA for him exclusively, doing nothing else. And he didn't bet very much, but when he wanted to bet, he wanted somebody, and I did that for him. And so I was one of the last people that actually did anything or worked with him.
Well,
But he was a good guy, got a good heart. But I never got to play backgammon with him.
Well, that's a good teaser
that was probably to your advantage.
Yeah, that's a good
Stan
teaser
was
for the
good.
next time you're on our show. We can talk about Stan and Billy Walters and lots of other stuff. So
There's an endless supply of.
Is J.D. Duarte the name you were searching for?
JD? No.
J.D. Duarte says it. The internet says he's the CEO of BetChris.
No. This is the.
yeah,
Okay.
you'll get
I don't know
100
why I
Twitter
can't
messages
think-
of people saying
I
his
probably
name.
shouldn't say it. I probably shouldn't say his name anyway. But
Yeah.
All right. So at the end of our show, we have a recommended. Richard, do you have a recommended for our guest today?
Yeah, I'm recommending an episode of the Freakonomics podcast called Turning Work into Play. When this comes out, it'll probably be a month old or so, but it's a really good episode. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And it's, it's basically, I mean, Freakonomics is mostly about sort of numbers kind of stuff, but this is about kind of how to be happier in your life. Approached from an analytical point of view. So check it out.
My recommended is a book. It's a novel by Ken Follett called Never. This is a modern-day international political thriller involving situations in Northern Africa, China, and the United States, among other places. The part of this book that should make it irresistible to listeners of this podcast is the opening scene, plus many scenes later, are set in Munchkin country. That alone should make you want to find out where Richard really came from.
Wow. I got no royalty from this.
But tell me you're not going to read the book now.
You're right. I have to go check it out.
So, Fats, do you have a recommended for our audience?
I do have a recommended, and for your listeners, I don't know if it came up in your one of your recent broadcasts, but you interviewed a good friend of mine from back in the day, Scotty Schettler, a few weeks back, and one of the things Scotty did was write a book, and his book is titled "We Were Wise Guys and Didn't Know It," and it's a
Good book.
chronological story of his foray through the gambling world from when he got to Vegas until he was done. And he has lots of good stories in there, lots of good history. He's got pictures. There's some pictures in there. And it's just, if you liked anything that Scotty said, it's absolutely worth the read. And Scotty's pretty modest too, because, for example, he was at Bet Bash as one of the speakers at one of the seminars, and he did the whole thing, and there were questions, and never once did he even mention his book. But I brought it up. I raised my hand and I asked about it, and I recommended to the whole crowd there, and it's definitely something that anybody that's interested in gambling or the history of gambling and what it was like back in the day really should read. Great book.
I agree. I'll second that. All right. Fats, it's been fun. We know you're going to be back again. All we have to do is figure out when. And so thank you. Richard, thank you. Go out and hit lots of royal flushes, everybody. Good day.